Today on Empowering Workplaces, we're going to be talking about how organizations can effectively shape remote work policies with Mine Dedekoca, Chief Happiness Officer at Happy Work Studio. Welcome to Empowering Workplaces, a show for anyone who wants to make work better and more fulfilling. We're your hosts, organizational psychologist Sanya Lucina
and aspiring leader Guille Santana. Join us in today's inspiring conversation.
Welcome, Mina, to Empowering Workplaces. We're so happy to have you with us. When I saw your smiling face as we were entering the studio, it just reminded me how much I love the work that you do and how much I love what you stand for. And I just, from near and afar, have been a huge fan of your work and a huge fan of your message and everything that you do. And so Guy and I are just absolutely thrilled to have you on with us to talk about this topic that I know all three of us are so incredibly passionate about, and I'm sure everyone that's tuning in, because it's important and it's messy and there's not always necessarily right answers, but goodness, is it something really important for organizations to be thinking about. So again, a huge, very warm welcome. And before we jump into many questions that we have on the topic, just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, so that way they know more about who you are if they already don't know you, and that way it'll give them even more perspective around your stance on remote work and where your philosophy comes from.
Thank you so much. Such a warm welcome. It's always nice to be on the same webinar with you. Now we are in this podcast, and I'm thrilled to be part of the podcast. So when I received that message from Guy, I was so excited. I said, yeah, let's do this. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I have been a happy kid. Let me start with that. So I'm always keeping my childhood photos on my desk to remind me of those times. But yeah, all my photos from childhood, from my being even a baby, like my teenage years, like, even during those hard ages, I've always been a happy person. And so that took me through my journey where I happened to have the brand as Happy Work Studio. And before that, I have been pioneering the remote work, the gig workforce, the future of work movement in Turkey since 2012. So before it was a thing, I was doing events, conferences, talking about the future of work, talking about remote work, but people did not believe. So they did not have that belief that this would be something that would go common until the pandemic. So before the pandemic, I was being invited to give keynote speeches, motivational speeches for the employees. And all of a sudden I was being invited to give consultancy on how to do the remote work in a right way. So because it became their reality all of a sudden, and they wanted to understand how they could do it in a better way. And that's how Happy Work Studio was created. Because I was thinking that, people resonate work with something negative. So if they, go to work, or if they are just like, working, they were just like thinking that it's supposed to be something boring, or it's supposed to be something negative, that they have to just like get it done so that they start enjoying themselves. But I said, okay, let's change this. Let's make, people work in a happy way. So that's where the name Happy Work Studio comes. So now I'm running two brands. One is Startist, the other one is Happy Work Studio. And with Startist, I'm still helping startups, mentoring them, holding their hands through their journey to investment. And on the side, I am doing happiness programs, happiness at work, personal happiness, culture, company culture, and remote work. So all that's shiny and nice stuff that I'm doing under Happy Work Studio.
Oh, I love that. And I'm so glad you'll get to share at least a part of what you're doing with us today. I think for me, I agree with you wholeheartedly around people's perceptions of work, and that a lot of times it's like that initial, you're not expected to love it, and you're not necessarily expected to be happy. And if you do love it, and if you are happy, how lucky are you to feel that way? And what a shame.
They call you Or
way.
they just criticize you and call you a workaholic, which is not necessarily being a workaholic. I mean, if you love your job, if you just like what you're doing, doesn't make you a workaholic. In fact, I'm just like intentionally sparing time to spend time with my friends, with my family, so I get to choose how I spend my day.
Yes. And I would agree with you that a lot of times you're happier actually with your work when you're able to do all
Exactly.
of that. It's
Yeah.
I don't we'll
Yeah.
have to do some research, but I don't think there's necessarily correlation between happiness and the number of hours you spend on your job. Um well, I love all of that you do. And I know the particular topic that we wanted to focus on today was remote work. And that's something the reason why I reached out to you, because I know how passionate you are about it. And I know that today it's getting increasingly complicated for organizations to figure out remote work. And I think during the pandemic, it became more of a norm out of the necessity. And I think a lot of us in this space were thinking, like, is this here to stay? What kind of flexibility is going to introduce? And then slowly and a little more fast, organizations change their policies. And you could see that all over the news, all over social media. And so it leaves us, I think, in a place to say, not to say if it's right or wrong, it's not necessarily black or white, but as you're making these decisions, first of all, even if you're an organization that decided to pull back on remote work, it doesn't mean you can't go back. I always tell people that when it's, whether it's a career decision or any decision in life, in majority of cases, when you make a decision, it doesn't need to be permanent. Some are, but the vast majority aren't. So sometimes you can experiment and you can say, okay, I tried this for these reasons and it wasn't for me, and it can, go back. And I think that's true for organizations. It's true for organizations that are still allowing for remote work. It's true for organizations that decided not to anymore. They can go back to it. And so the first questions that I had for you is, what kind of information do you think would be important for companies to consider, when they're deciding if a remote work policy is right for them?
Mm-hmm. So we are now seeing more, leaning into the hybrid way of working rather than, remote. But what we call, I mean, I think that's a transition period. And before I talk about what needs to be considered, I would like to underline one thing because I think this is really key for our conversation today. When we are talking about remote work or like the future of work or whatever that we are now experiencing today, we see that people are focusing only on the location perspective. So this change that has been happening since the pandemic is not only about the location. So it's not about where we work, but it's about how we work. So I think we should be differentiating that really clearly, because otherwise we'll always be in those conversations where we talk about, are we working from home? Are we working distantly? Are we working from office or not? I mean, if you just like look at those, conversations about going back to the office, it's always going back to the office. It's not about like, are we canceling our meetings or working synchronously or asynchronously? No one is discussing those. Everyone is just like, they are so much obsessed about whether to be in office or non-office, that everyone is just like not even talking about, but like always talking about the location. So that decision that they have to make is not only about the location. It needs to be about how they communicate, how they meet, how they do their thing, how they collaborate, how they work together. So it should be beyond that. And for that, the first thing that they have to look, and we have a work audit, remote work audit, AI assistant with Remote First Institute. That's just like, assessing. I always like assessments. So before I start a project with companies, I always like to make an assessment to just like, identify those gaps where they need extra support, where they need to implement new processes, procedures, and tools, because they usually think that if we buy this tool, everything is going to change, everything is going to improve, but that's not the fact. Sometimes they have the tool, but they don't know how to use it. So the first thing that they need to consider is, do they have the structures? Do they have the processes in place? And by that, I mean whether they can track the productivity of the employees, whether they have a performance appraisal, and that they can just like clearly track, or have, the outcome based culture where they don't have to just, and we were discussing about this before the recording, but like whether they are able to base their assessment on outcome or not, whether they have the communication tools in place, whether they have all those necessary processes and SOPs in place, documentation in place. So those are the key points where they have to look at. So it's not about like, whether we can go hybrid, whether we can go remote or not, but like, what does it take us to do so that we can have this flexibility in our culture?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, I think about my career, and even from the first day that I started managing teams, my team was never in the same office. And I started my career in Chicago. And at that time, the majority of my team was in the United States, but we were across at least two cities, at least across Chicago and Atlanta. And I knew my team was coming in. I could see them, but like I didn't go hover and, check what they were doing at their computers. And I could assume that my team in Atlanta was coming in, but aside from being physically present, you're not necessarily monitoring like, how much time are they spending doing something. And so I think there is this sometimes a little bit of an illusion that just because somebody's physically present somewhere, it's a proxy to productivity, or it's a proxy like, well, yes, I know they're showing up, but hopefully you have enough trust with your team to know even if they're somewhere else, and if you can't, if nobody can see them, that they're actually working. But then to your point, it's what are we trying to achieve and how clear is that? And now I've been in the workforce for long enough that I know more often than not, the majority of us are a little ambitious about our goals and what we can achieve. And, you start the year, you start the quarter, you're like, yeah, I'm going to do all this. And then weeks go by and you're like, oh no, time went away from me. And that's human. And I think that happens a lot. And so it's also those discussions and the open dialogues between leaders and their teams and checking in and understanding if something's not going according to plan, why? Like, did we take on something too big? Are we aligned on what we wanted to accomplish? Do we have the same ideas in place? Can I help you as a leader, coach you on how to do something more efficiently? Or did we just miscalculate? Like, was something so much bigger than we thought it was? And then do we have a discussion around, well, now that we know it's bigger, is it still important to do, or do we deprioritize? I think as much as I think people think of it as a collaborative process more than this is my direct report and this is what I expect of them. The more I think that relationship, to your point, is going to change, and the person's goal is going to be our collective goal. And then having that accountability, we're going to think about it differently. And I laughed when you said, this is still my learning even too, like, even though it's an area I'm so passionate about the physical presence. So I work from Buenos Aires, Argentina, right? And of course, like my team is all over the world at this point. I think we span most of the continents. And I remember just recently I was going to visit my parents in Belgrade in Europe. And I told everyone I was going to be in Belgrade, but I'm like, they wouldn't even know. I logged in at the same time. And so seriously, and Gia even sent me a note at some point. She's like, okay, I'm going to set this meeting. I assume you're still in Belgrade. I'm like, nope, back in Buenos Aires. But for whatever reason, I felt that need to share with people like where I physically am, where it actually really made no difference at all. Like it didn't impact how I was doing work at all. So I think it's just one of those.
It's only necessary if you're just like, scheduling a meeting, like a team meetings, to know what time zones they're in. That's only it. Apart from that, because like apart from the synchronous communication that you need to have, no one would care like where you're joining from.
Exactly. So my next question is, I think as many organizations are going back to some kind of a hybrid or mix or trying to figure things out, they're also trying to see, like, do we give the same rules to everyone? Are there different rules? But how do we make it seem fair? Like, regardless of how we approach it, how do we make these decisions and how do we communicate? So what are some things you think companies should make sure to do if they do have like a mix of like remote in-office workers? Like if there are some differences based on role, however they decide that it's not a one size fits all, what can they do around making those decisions and communication for employees not to have this like perceived unfairness when it comes to those decisions or whatever they and whatever category, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, they fell into, that they don't feel like they were not treated fairly.
So what I like to say always is that being fair doesn't always necessarily means being equal. So equality does not necessarily mean being fair. So with the companies that I'm working with, helping them transition to either hybrid or remote work, what we usually do is we have a project team. And that project, within those project teams, I always want a full representation of either locations, teams, or because sometimes they have the field teams where they need to be present in the field, whereas there could be some software developers which does not their job does not require to be in the field, or like a marketing person or like an HR person in which that person needs to receive some paperwork, do paperwork. So it depends on the role. So when we are just like working with companies, I always prefer to have like a team of change agents with full representation so that they are creating the rules. So whatever is being done, it needs to come from the bottom up, so not from top to down. Because if it comes from the top to down, then it's always going to be the tricky, and they are not going to embrace it, and they're always going to find something that is not fair. But if it's just like being co-created with the team, with the full representation of their team members, then everyone is going to just like put it on the paper and say, okay, this is how we do our work, and this is our conditions, and this should be the way where we are just like either communicating how we use the office, how we make the meetings, how we collaborate. So with those companies, I mean, it's really crucial, by the way, to draw that frame so that people know where does that lay it down in their jobs day to day, on a day-to-day basis. So it's really critical to have a remote handbook. So whatever you do, you need to have that handbook, the policy, the remote work policy, so that people on their day one, even when they're being hired, you can share that so they know there are no surprises along the way, so everything is clear. In fact, I mean, some companies, they don't want to let each department work remotely. So on the first section of that remote policy, we specify which departments are eligible to work remotely. We even specify that because if you're clear about that, if you're being transparent about that, then you will not have glitches along the way. And people are going to be hired on that, or people will be just they will know what to expect. So it's always those gray areas that make people uncomfortable. If they know what to expect, then there's not going to be any problem along the way.
Yeah, I so wholeheartedly agree with that. And I would add one thing just because of my life experiences and maybe even like recent ones just in general is so one, to again reiterate what you said, is like be as explicit as possible around what those remote work policies are, be as detailed as possible. I would add to, in some way, shape, or form, it could be surveys, it could be conversation, to ask employees what that means to them and how they understand it. And maybe also ask like, hey, are there additional things that you would need, to your point, from like a bottom up standpoint? So two things: how do you understand it? Is there anything else that you need? Why do I say that? Because I think as humans, and this has nothing to do with language, like actually spoken language, if English is your native language, I think none of ours on, in this podcast is, it's more in just the communication of, this is what I said and this is what somebody else heard and how they understood it. Because there could also be things where you're like, I'm amazingly clear on this one, and either you're not, or to somebody else they just interpret it differently. And before something blows up for a bad reason, there could either be like, I mean, something as simple as a focus group, like, hey, we have this handbook, let's have a conversation, what does this mean to you all? Or even, of course, we're a big fan of surveys at Question Pro, asking employees, after a little while, like, hey, how does this policy working for you? If there was something we could change about it, like no promises, no guarantees, but if there's something we could change about it, what would you recommend? Is there something? And I think a lot of times in conversations, like we're so used to thinking about either something that we had before, or like we're trained like what's possible and what's not possible, right? I think that's as we become adults, we become a little less creative. And so to almost have a conversation, not to ask an employee like what they need, but maybe ask about their challenges, because then you can find maybe ways to be more creative in how you solve them or how you communicate something. Because if somebody tells you like, oh, I would love to start my day later, or I would love to do this, or in my remote work, this is also what I would like. Why? Like, what is the reason behind it? Because maybe as an organization, like, I really need everyone to start at the same time, because it's really hard to, if we have to have a meeting, or if some emergency happens, I'm like, goodness, I don't know when this person starts. Where do I look it up? To understand what the need behind that is, because there could be that win-win. Like, and I think that's something that organizations and individuals can both look for, is to understand what are really the needs of both. What are the traditional ways we've solved them? But then could we get creative and solve them differently, so that way both parties really feel like they came up on top, that neither one is making a compromise or a sacrifice, but actually we found a new way to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, so you made an excellent point. Survey touch points, like, asking all the time how they feel about it. And just like to tell them that nothing is set in stone. So everything can be changed. So, because like usually people get intimidated by those rules, but like, everything can change in time. It's test and try. If it doesn't work, then we can always go back. And as you mentioned, I mean, even with the remote work, I'm making those decisions, fundamental decisions. You can always change that. And surveys, I mean, companies used to do like once in a year pulse surveys, but now it's really important to do more frequent, and to understand like what's working, what's not working. It's really crucial. I mean, just like listening and being transparent and having psychological safety. So everything stands on psychological safety. If you just like, make people psychologically safe, then the 50% of the problem is solved actually.
Yeah. Mine, I think our next question is like super tied to what you just said, because I think productivity changes as the world changes. Our circumstances change, the way we work changes. So we wanted to ask you, what are some ways companies maintain remote work policies without fearing a decline in productivity?
Okay, so when people talk about productivity, I usually see that they're talking about like producing more outcome by working more.
Yeah.
Actually, what we mean is working less and producing more. So that's why I think it's really important to have the productivity tools. So using some technology, now we are building our own AI assistants to increase our productivity as Remote First Institute. So having those, tools in place so that people are spending less time and producing more. And collaboration is really key in remote work, because to let people work asynchronously, so that you have a team working 7/24, so you don't have to wait the other person, but it's just like going on throughout the day, throughout the week, and it's really helping the team as well. So all those productivity tools for tracking the status of any work, or like collaborative tools where people can work on the same document at different times, giving visibility to teams, and having clear goals. As I said, transparency is really the key. So if you are transparent about the goals, if everyone knows, when I was working for Kosovo, I was their country manager, and everyone had their metrics, and the metrics were weekly metrics. So everyone knew what they had to deliver at the end of the week. And if they had a blockage, if they had any blocker that they would be just like raising a flag saying, okay, I won't be able to deliver this at the end of this week, and I need the support from this or that person in the team, or we need to relook at this metric. And so if you are just like clear about the deliverables and the deadlines, then you don't need to have that strict surveillance systems. This is productivity. I mean, if everyone can just like, this is really the key to productivity. Just like giving them that space, giving them the tools, and putting in structure for productivity about the outcomes, and making a real outcome-based organization where we have the company strategy, then the department-based strategy and the goals, so that everyone knows what to deliver, when to deliver.
And that's one thing like we've been doing with our team, is having monthly team meetings where all the heads of the different departments will report on, this is what we accomplished last quarter, this is what we're going to do next quarter. We try to keep it to an hour, so it's like very high level, but so there is a cross team clarity. And then I have weekly meetings with everyone who heads up different teams in our department. And I do it old school, like Excel spreadsheet, but we have like, what's the task, like what's month, what's the goal, what are the KPIs, when are we getting it done? And then if it's something that needs to be like reshuffled, we'll update the date. But to your point, I don't. Some might think it's a little bit too much weekly. I've gotten that feedback, but to me, that's one of the things that I believe has been effective for our team, because it's that continued communication, and that it's always that clarity in almost as real time as possible on where we're doing and how we're doing things. Like, it's not, oh, after a month they check in with someone and I've realized something's not on track. It's much harder to correct it, or it's much harder. For example, if I have one of my team members say, listen, I'm way over capacity to get everything done. Let's look at January and see, like, out of the things that we brainstormed when we, came up with Q1, what do we think is still the most critical? And so having that conversation as soon as possible really, I think in my case, has helped like alleviate any disappointment. It's increased alignment. And then when it comes to productivity, it also has given me an opportunity to ask someone like, well, if you can get to it, like, just help me understand why, like not in an accusatory way, but like, do you have too many conflicting priorities? How long is something taking you?
Yeah.
Is there somebody in another team that maybe we can ask for advice? But it just makes everything a lot more fluid. And again, fewer surprises if there's something we can't get to as a team.
Yeah. Over communication never hurts. So over communicate.
And I'm still a work in progress. And I was just joking with someone, and I won't even get into the conversation because it was more of a personal topic, but I was laughing when I was saying like, oh, remember this conversation we had? And the person said what they remembered. I was like, no, like, that wasn't it at all. So like, even I'm still learning along the way of like, how do we recap? How do we make, sure we're on the same place? But to your point, doing it more often rather than less often, at least it gives you an opportunity to learn, even if you're still not doing it effectively, and course correct along the way.
So, Mine, what advice would you give to companies for what they can do to help foster a deeper connection with their colleagues and the organization as a whole?
So when you look at the successful companies with remote work, I mean, there's several different kinds of things, but one thing that really works well is in-person get-togethers. So as much as we like working remotely and having that flexibility, having that in-person experience is also really key, and some companies do it like a company-wide retreat once or twice a year, and some let their team members to get together with their teams, and so they give a budget for the team members to get together in their own specific regions. So that in-person touch is really key. That's one thing. And also having little circles, get-togethers, virtual gatherings where people get the chance to share their expertise, their hobbies with each other, because that lets them get connected at a more personal level. Once you have that personal touch, that deeper connection, it never goes away. I am like for Vertisant, I am now giving them advisory. I'm doing lean in circles with the women of Vertisant, where we have the safe space where we talk about the common challenges of being a woman at work or even at life. We talk about self-compassion, we talk about productivity, negotiation, anything that we're interested in. And we're also exchanging ideas, experiences, and that is just like, creating that, deep level bonding with each other. Once you just like, let people get bonded at that level, then you don't need to do any employee engagement happy hours. This because like this is more deeper, and then the connection is like deeper, and it goes, for a lifetime. And creating those, moments where people have those connections or where they feel self-growth. So that's like once I started a community, and with that community, their goal was getting certified. I created study groups so that they could study together and towards the same goal. So you can just like, create those groups, either like employee resource groups. We have like, we have different Slack channels, like pets for pet owners, for parents. So you can just like, find those employee resource groups and understand what they need, what would interest them. So get people connected at their interest level. So all, those, forming those deeper connections really helps. And also like, finding things that people are passionate about, like the book clubs, movie clubs. I was doing also TED circles where we were like watching a TED talk and then having conversation on that. Because like otherwise you always talk about work and talk about challenges. But this is just like reminding each other, there's a different Mine, there is a different Sanya, Guy, like, and talking about the family, talking about their, what they enjoy, what they do, starting those conversations. We also, one thing that we do is during the all hands, people present their countries and, give little information about their culture, their food. So that gives, some information about where they're coming from, where they're living. And so that's also creating that, deeper connection with each other.
So as you were talking about that, I was thinking about even some of the things that we've done at Question Pro. And after last year's, like kind of our flagship Q1 survey, we created something as simple as a bunch of Slack channels based on people's interests. And to me, it's so fun. Like one is a workout group. And I was mentioning before, like my workout is yoga. But I love watching all these people who are like, I just ran another marathon and I did, this. And I was like, wow, good for them. Like you see all of these different angles, or someone's like, I just did my first 5K. Like it's people's passions and they manifest themselves very differently. But there's this line around like, fitness and enjoying, working out, whatever that looks like to each person. I'll also quickly share one mistake that I made for whatever, if anyone can learn from me. So one of our first employee surveys when I joined the company, it was during the pandemic. Things were just getting a little bit better. And Mina, like we were saying, a lot of employees were saying, we'd love to get together. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I said, listen, guys, I don't have time to organize these get-togethers. And also like we're all over the world. But if anybody would volunteer, I'll support you. I'll make sure to get you a budget. And nobody volunteered. And nobody volunteered because probably from a personality standpoint, from a bandwidth standpoint, they just didn't have time. Like they wanted to go, but they didn't want to call a coffee shop or a bar and secure. Like it was just not something they were comfortable with. And so that was a good learning for me. Because I thought, oh, surely, people are going to volunteer and they're going to be interested. And if that's important to them. And the learning was, okay, I should do it, or somebody in my team or somebody in HR should do it because it's important to our organization. But it's beyond individuals' comfort levels to organize something like that. So I wanted to share that because to your point of like people gather, having get-togethers, it was just something that I thought would be a lot easier to outsource to our teams than it was. But it didn't make, just because nobody could raise a hand and do it at the time, didn't mean that it was any less important to them. So I think there's something like maybe as HR or culture departments, we can't take on everything. But when we look at some of those things that are most important to our people, it's good to find like the bandwidth and try it. And not everything's going to work. And like I've tried things that have also not worked, and that can be a whole other conversation because we're starting to run out of time for our one today. But I think it's one more lesson that it's okay to try things, and some things will work brilliantly and other things might not be as effective, and you try again and you try it in a different way. But people do want those different kinds of connections. And, going back to our philosophy of asking people what they want before, again, that's, you gave so many great examples. And if someone's listening and saying like, how could it possibly do all of those? You don't have to, but an effective thing could be asking your workforce, like, hey, like, what would you enjoy the most? Like, if we could do some of these things, what would you really like the best? And then you just start at the top. And as you maybe have more bandwidth, you try out different kinds of things.
And just to add one more last thing. So at Happitude, when we are doing the Happiness at Work programs, Happiness Workplace Consultancy Program, we say that there are 3 P's in workplace happiness. And the first level is the pleasure level, and the second one is the passion level, and the third level is the ultimate level, is the purpose level. So usually companies, when they talk about employee engagement, employee happiness, they usually do the pleasure activities, which is like, the fun games, the happy hours. So it's like most of the time they think that that would create, happiness. But in fact, the second and the third level is more sustainable. So passion is like, giving them the opportunity to do things that they're passionate about, even their job. I mean, just let them do whatever they're passionate about. And the third level, purpose level. So whatever there is, what is more meaningful for them. Like with one company that we were working with last year, during this time we had a massive earthquake in Turkey, and they were just like, having those groups of people, volunteers, going to the field, going to those cities where they were impacted, and just like helping people there. So, and that was like, at the purpose level, that it connected people. And it was like, creating and being supported by their company, and just like, feeling that the being supported was so much meaningful. And it is like 100 times more powerful than doing a happy hour.
Yeah.
So I really want to, underline this, so that that the companies are not always looking for options to make people happy for a shorter period of time, but just like, concentrate at a deeper happiness level where they're either passionate about, or that they feel more meaningful about what they're doing.
Mine, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for all the advice, for all your experience. Again, this is such a big topic, and I know a lot of organizations are really working through it and trying to figure out what is best for them, what's best for the business, what's best for their people. And like we keep saying, it's not always black and white, and there's not always 100% correct answer. It's different for different organizations. But I'm so grateful for everything that you've shared. You've given a lot of great things for our listeners to think about. As we begin to wrap up, I just wanted to see if there was anything else in the end that you wanted to share that maybe we didn't already touch on in our discussion today.
So there's one thing that I would like to mention, and that is like, I'm going to say that whether you're just like ready, you think that you're ready to go remote or not, just know that based on research, and there has been so many researches, surveys done with the employees, even if the people who are working in a hybrid mode, they would go for a pay cut to go fully remote. And 98% of all the employees that have been surveyed, and it's, they prefer remote work. So even if you think that you're not ready to go for it now, you will be forced to do so, because this is the time for the talent. And if you want to keep the best talent in your company, you need to adjust. And it's better to adjust now than tomorrow. So take action. Just make everything, in place, so that you are just going for the best talent.
I love it. Thank you so much again, Mina. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all of your words of wisdom. Thank you, Guille, for all of your contributions. And thank you so much to our listeners for joining us. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.